Hi, this is Jim,
And Ralph.
and we welcome you to Psychology Takeaways podcast, where we attempt to look at current events in psychology, research in psychology, and fit them into some sort of a schema that is helpful for Ralph and I to understand, and for you, our listeners.
And one of the things that we're going to talk about today is an aspect of human behavior that is common, but not particularly pretty.
Okay, common but not pretty. Let's see. Um, um, Bad behavior on Facebook.
No.
Let's see. Um, um,
And bad behavior on TikTok is not particularly pretty either.
Oh,
But
well, bad behavior on social media, which
yeah,
which we're working on right now for a
but
continuing ed course, right?
but we are going to talk about bad behavior in one of our favorite spots,
Um, the pub?
the pub, the coffee shop. No, none
No.
of the above.
Okay.
Our own personal vehicle.
Aha. Bad behavior in our car?
In our car.
Uh, in our car on the road?
In our car on the road, yes.
Okay.
Not in our car doing inappropriate things while the car is stopped,
Oh,
but in our car while we're driving, and you say immediately, "Oh, I know what that is. That's road rage."
yeah. Well, you and I have been talking about this for the last day or so. Sheila and I were away for the weekend, and we were near a large city, and um, she was the victim of, I would think, well, I said that she was the victim of road rage, but I see now that it wasn't road rage, it was something else. But when she was trying to merge onto an expressway, people were not letting her on. When she was trying to get over to an exit so she could get off an express, people were not letting her get off. And somebody, as she was in her lane, passed on the left shoulder, and honked, not toot toot, but
Yeah,
you know, it really shook her up. I mean, we were in a construction zone too, which didn't help.
and part of the thing with that is that technically is not road rage.
Right.
Road rage is when you say, as the driver, to yourself, wait a minute, I've heard this expression, rubbing is racing. That comes from NASA, and the cars rub over and they bump back bumpers and they rub the side of the other car and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, sideswiping. Okay.
Sideswiping.
Yeah.
And, yeah, that's fine on the racetrack, but it doesn't translate into the highway. And the thing is, that is road rage. That's pure
Yeah.
and simple.
Right.
You're angry, you're hostile, you're taking it out on the other vehicles
Yeah.
around you.
Okay. Yeah. So when I said that people were in road rage, they really weren't in that sense. They were engaged in aggressive driving.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting to me because I hadn't seen any of the statistics on this recently, but Jim got some together, and this comes from the National Association for Highway Traffic Safety. I'm not sure if that's the actual title, but that's
It's published, not published. It's in a uh, blog by AAA. Oh,
AAA.
they seem to know some stuff about automobiles.
Yeah,
And I'll put
and
it up under Learn More.
the interesting thing to me is now, if you think about it, there's approximately 350 million people in America right now.
Yeah, I'd say that's about right.
They did a 30-day study and they surveyed.
They ask people, have you engaged in aggressive driving behavior, right?
Right. And what they did is they surveyed and they got back 460 plus million results
Of people who said that,
people who said, yes, I have engaged in aggressive driving. So that's more than the entire population of the United States. It is, in fact, probably that every driver, legal licensed driver who, did the survey, said, not only have I engaged in aggressive driving, but I've done it more than once this month.
Mm-hmm.
So you say to yourself, okay,
And what do we know about survey research? Do we know that people are not necessarily going to be honest with the responses?
yeah. And you might say, well, I've engaged in aggressive driving twice this month when it's really 5 times.
Right. So
Now,
the numbers seem to suggest to me, if you think of, I've talked to you and to Karen and to Sheila and to my friend Jer, and in the last month, no one, the four of you have engaged in aggressive driving. So that means there's an identifiable group out there that probably is doing it more than once, maybe every day on their way to or from work.
yeah, and that cadre, let's call it, and arbitrarily, let's say that's 1 million drivers.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the thing is that out of that 1 million drivers, what we're going to find is that some of them have had a number of accidents.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them might never have had an accident themselves,
But
but
they might
might
have
have
caused
caused,
accidents. Yeah.
if you're trying to get over to exit, and here's a presumption that I'm going to infer. I don't know that this is true, but I'm going to make this inference. A lot of people, I think, who are from, quote, the big city or bigger cities, know the road. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So you're trying to get off, let's say you want to go to a small town 15 miles outside of the bigger city. So you're trying to get off the freeway and you haven't moved over quite early enough. And so you're 500 yards away and you see the sign that says exit to Whoville here. And
Which is exactly what the second circumstance that I mentioned with Sheila was.
yeah, and
She
so
hadn't gotten over far
she hadn't gotten over quickly
quickly
or
enough.
early enough.
Yeah.
And so everybody else said, that idiot is in the wrong place, and just blew by her
Mm-hmm.
and didn't let her in.
Right.
And the thing is, suppose she herself had been a little aggressive.
Go and tell me some more.
Okay, so you're driving along, you're trying to get off, you've got your turn signal going, nobody's letting you in, and you say, to hell with them, and you cut over.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if the guy behind, the guy who's oncoming is watching, he might hit his brakes,
Mm-hmm.
but he might not. If he's on his phone or if he's
Mm-hmm.
looking at the trees or whatever, talking to his passenger,
And might miss it, right?
might miss that you're coming in, bang. Or he might say, boop, bang on his brakes. The guy behind him runs into him, and the aggressive
Cutter
turn,
inner.
cutter inner turns off, and hey, I see nothing. I know nothing.
Okay, I got to take exception to something you said here, Ralph. You talked about big cities, and this was a fair-sized city, not huge, a couple 100,000. And it was really interesting. This is a city where when you drive anywhere in the city, you can't drive 2 blocks without seeing a huge church, a mega church. So
Okay.
you'd think that the people who were out driving on the roads on a Sunday might have been churched and with those values. But we were on our way to Whoville.
Okay.
We live in Whoville, Ralph.
Yeah, we do.
It's called Mount Pleasant, but
Yeah.
it's Whoville. And in the last 24 hours, you've been the victim of uh, aggressive driving. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I was driving. Jim and I were going to the university, and I happened to be driving, and we were heading in on one of the main roads, and I was in the center lane, and there was a gentleman who was in the left lane who was going to turn left.
And this was at a light.
This
was
was at a light.
intersection of the light.
Yeah, and the light had just turned to caution. Now, my reaction to that was to lift my foot off the gas.
Mm-hmm.
the guy who was coming in the other direction, who wanted to turn his left, what he did was floor it
Mm-hmm.
and pull right across in front of me. Now, if I had been a driver who was a little bit aggressive and said, "I can beat the yellow light,"
Yeah.
we would have
You would have been touching cars at that
touching
point.
cars at that point.
Yeah.
And the
Now,
other
I
one,
congratulated you in my mind. I don't think I said anything because my knuckles are too white. But thank you for having some skills there, Ralph.
and the other one was
Coming home.
coming home from our stint at the university, and there was a fellow following me behind me. He came up quite close to me. I put on my turn signal to turn into the side road that Jim lives on, and his reaction was to creep up right to the point where he was not touching, but he was very, very close to my back bumper.
Not leaving the traditional or
One,
usual
one,
one car
one or
length.
two car lengths,
Yeah.
and fortunate there was nobody coming out the side road, and so I was able to make kind of a quick turn, quicker than I usually do, and get out of that driver's way.
Yeah,
But
and he passed you on the right-hand side, and he was partially on the road, but mostly on the shoulder, right?
on the shoulder, yeah,
And
and
he must have had to go and do something really, really important, Ralph. That's
I,
all I can think of.
well, maybe he was realizing that
Maybe his house was on fire.
yeah, or happy hour was just about to end, or
Yeah, well,
something. I
who
don't
knows?
know. But certainly he felt that whatever he was doing was much more important than what I was doing.
Yeah, correct. Correct.
And that, I think, is one of the things that leads to uh, aggressive driving. People see that whatever agenda they have is more important than any other right to be on the road.
Which is kind of a endemic sort of thing, not just on the road. It's, you know, my way or the highway.
Right.
In this case, we're talking about the road, but yeah, we've talked about this a little bit in the past, and it's, I don't know what we call it, an attitude of entitlement, perhaps.
So that's a common phrase. Maybe it's just an attitude that is so focused on your particular uh, situation, agenda, that you don't uh, stop for a moment and think, what about the other people who are here?
Yeah.
One of the classic examples, and I think some of our listeners to identify with this one, is people in parking lots. You come into a parking lot, you're pulling into a parking space, and suddenly from the opposite side, somebody pulls in and they pull right through to where you were about to pull in.
Mm-hmm. It happened this morning when Sheila and I went to a store to buy some lumber.
The other one, which is also classic, is what is the usual speed supposed to be in a parking lot? Well, 15, 20.
15 or so, yeah.
You know,
Have you seen 45 miles an hour in a parking lot?
yeah,
Me
I,
too.
I have seen that, and I've seen people who totally ignored the lanes of the parking lot and simply cut across the whole lot.
Mm-hmm.
Well,
Hey, there are people walking around out there. Maybe some people on their cell phones who are not paying attention to anything.
yeah, and
So,
you
boom.
know, uh, and you've got somebody who's got, let's say, a box truck, and there's a guy behind it on his cell phone, and he steps out. Well, you can't see him until he steps out. If
Mm-hmm.
you're doing 15 miles an hour, time to stop. If you're doing 45,
Difficult stuff.
difficult to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. I can remember, Ralph, vaguely, that you had a story about, I think you and Karen were coming back from lunch or something like that, coming back to Mount Pleasant,
Yeah,
and a car passed you.
yeah. And here's the story. We were turning. There's a turnoff, the first turnoff into Mount Pleasant from the highway, and we turned on that. Now it's basically a two-lane road, but it's of course one way because it's a turnoff.
Yeah. And it's
And
on a
it,
big hill, big curve there.
yeah, big curve and a downhill. When you
Hmm.
get to the bottom of the downhill, it becomes a two-lane road.
Okay.
So we're turning off, and this person behind me goes blowing by me about 80 miles an hour. Now
Hmm.
I'm turning off doing 65 maybe because I know that that turnoff in good weather can easily be made at that speed.
Hmm.
This person goes by me about 80.
Okay.
Now we get down to the two-lane road. Obviously, she's a car length, 6 car lengths actually ahead of me. And somebody else pulls out from the side road. And so there's now two vehicles, and then there's three vehicles between me and this person. So we get down to where I'm going to turn off on my side street. And I look up, and there the person is, ahead of me in the other lane.
Uh-huh.
And
All this dipsy doodling
dips
yielded 2 car lengths.
2 car lengths.
Uh-huh.
Now, the AAA also did a study. This is years ago. But one of the things that they did was a study of how much do you gain by aggressive driving? And the answer came if you are doing a drive that is over 2 hours long, what you gain by aggressive driving is 2 minutes.
Wow.
So you have to say to yourself, is
Two
two
minutes worth
minutes
it.
worth it?
Yeah.
Is it worth my life? Is it worth somebody else's life?
Hmm.
Is it worth my car that I like a lot being all smashed up? Uh, is it worth it my old junker being all smashed up?
Is it worth you being smashed up? I mean,
Yeah,
that's the big thing. And we're talking just about aggressive driving. We're not talking about aggressive distracted driving at this point,
yeah,
or aggressive impaired driving. Those are things we can talk about in other podcasts, right?
right. Now, one of the things that the police and sheriffs are reporting is that as marijuana has become legal in our state for recreational use, they're finding people who say, "Oh no, officer, haven't been drinking. I haven't had a drink tonight," but
But
they are impaired.
yeah, it's actually in our state now. It's number two, alcohol number one, cannabis number two.
Yeah,
Yeah. So where we were in the southern western part of Michigan, there are lots of signs up there saying something to the effect of buzz driving is impaired driving.
yeah,
And so we're beginning to make people aware of that also. But you might ask, well, how come? Why are people taking their? We used to take our guns to town, right?
right.
Yeah. Why are people taking their cars on the road and behaving like fools? Now, it could be out of frustration.
Yeah,
They when somebody's frustrated, they can have just directly attack the source of the frustration. They're frustrated with their boss, so they can you know go postal. But for the most part, we don't do that. We use indirect aggression. So you take your anger and you go someplace else with it, like the road.
yeah. And how many times do you hear somebody telling the story where they say, so my wife and I got into an argument, and after 5 minutes of fruitless discussion, and we were starting to yell at each other, so I just went out and got in my car and drove.
I've heard that one before. Yeah.
And
And I
where
think.
did you drive to? Oh, I don't know, just around.
Hmm.
Well, You left angry, frustrated. How did you drive? Probably not the way you normally do,
Hmm. Yeah.
assuming that you're a reasonably careful, reasonably non-aggressive driver.
Yep. So we can see this driving, uh, aggressive driving is at least a public health problem, if not a psychological problem. Certainly, if you engage in antisocial behavior, we can diagnose that. But I don't think most people who get into accidents or engage in aggressive driving ever see the therapist because of it. I don't know if they're ever sentenced to, a $50 fine or $100 fine, and you go and have to see Dr. Carroll for a month.
Probably not. I think, people who get ulcery therapy, usually it's for anger management issues, and often the people who are aggressive drivers don't present in a courtroom anger management,
Issues, yeah.
issues. They come in, they're well dressed, and they say,
It was
"Well,
the other guy's fault.
it was the other guy's fault.
Right.
He cut me off, so I guess I banged into his bumper a little bit
Threw
and
something at him.
threw something at him, or uh,
Although,
which at that point, then that becomes road rage.
hmm, yeah,
So, there's a line between all of these quote normal driving, aggressive driving, and road rage,
yeah,
and it's sometimes a very thin line.
and very blurry, which, as our listeners have heard in the past, is endemic with psychology. We deal with a lot of blurry concepts, right?
Yeah,
Well, until next time, this is Jim
and row
saying keep your stick on the ice because we're
because we're
all
all
in
in
this
this
together.
together.